Some of my followers have asked me to explain the phrases that I say at the end of every podcast. If you have not been watching for the last 4 years, then this is the podcast for you to get those explanations quickly, as quick as I can. I will not do long Cori stories about them, but it should be helpful so that you can kind of laugh along with us at the end of each of those. So let's start with the first one. The first little phrase that is on my list is no green bananas. And the story behind that is that my husband used to make the grocery list, and in our house, if we run out of something, you write it down right away. Something is, you have to go to the list. But he would always write yellow bananas. Yellow bananas. Every week he'd write yellow bananas, which really meant that he didn't want green ones, but I know what a ripe banana looks like. I'm 60 years old. And so I told that story because I thought it was funny, and I asked if anyone else's husbands had little tics or things that they did that just made them smile. And he does not write yellow bananas anymore, but now I always say at the end of the podcast, no green bananas, just to keep it light, make people laugh. The second one that I use is Waddle On. And Waddle On happened when we were at Shepherd's Harvest, the knitting event in Minnesota that happens in May every year. It's on the opposite side of the Twin Cities, so the northeast corner. I live in the far southwest corner, but I always invite a group of friends to come and stay at the house, and we enjoy that event. And afterwards, we always go to Stillwater, which is a town on the river that divides between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and it's a beautiful little river town, and we go over, and there's a yarn store there called Darn It Anyway, and we walk down the street, and we go eat, and we visit Darn It Anyway, and as we were coming back, we passed the candy shop, and on the corner in a parking lot is this little Snoopy character standing there holding a platter of candy. And I wanted to take a picture. We were going to take a picture behind this little statue, which was actually pretty large. And I'll put a picture in here. And I tried to duck under between the arm of the statue and the building, and I got stuck. My backpack hooked on the arm of the statue, and Matt was behind me, and Matt's super tall. So Matt was not thinking that he would go through the hole. There was a little wrought iron fence along, so you'd have to walk all the way around. So I was just thinking, I'll just duck under, but my backpack got stuck, and I started to laugh. And I have 2 knee replacements, bad knees, and I'm yelling to Matt to just push my rear end, and he does not want to have any part of that, to unhook me to get me under. And so I was down in this crouch trying to waddle through underneath this statue. And that story became just waddle on, just keep trying, just keep plugging away, just keep, if you get yourself in a tough predicament, you just got to get yourself out of it. And then that's the story of Waddle On. During the pandemic, I found myself complaining a lot about a number of things. I think everyone was having a hard time. We were all going through this kind of together. Some of us had it much worse than others. But what I found is that I was able to stay home. I did not have to go into a job. I was not working in a hospital or a building, and I needed to just zip. And I had food on the table. Were things hard? Yes. But I needed to just take some advice on don't complain with your mouth full, right? Like my mouth was full. I had everything I needed. My basic needs were being met, but I was complaining a lot. And I can be that person. I can kind of complain about things and move on, but the people around me don't always get to move on then. And so I just came up with this little saying that, maybe we should just take a little look around and be like, and it is certainly okay to feel like you're suffering and complain about your suffering and then move on. Absolutely. But I can kind of sometimes find myself in that not being appreciative of just what I have and how bountiful my life is. So don't complain with your mouth full came out of that one. You'll never regret ripping back happened when there's that moment when you make a mistake in your knitting and you think to yourself, I'm just going to keep going. I don't want to rip it back. Whether or not it's 1 row or 5 rows or 10 rows, there's just that moment that you have that little struggle in yourself that you're mad, right? You're angry, you messed it up, you made a mistake, and you want to keep going. You want to not make negative progress. You want to work towards something. But usually it takes very little time to rip something back. And once you get back to that point, you're so happy that you don't have to look at that or think about it anymore and just move on. And so you don't regret the ripping back part any longer. I mean, occasionally I have ripped back to a non-mistake. That's kind of a bummer, right? Like you think you had a problem there, you rip back in lace and then you count and whatever, and you're like, no, that wasn't wrong. That's a bummer. But in the moment when you're trying to decide, oh, look, there's a thing right here, give yourself that second to be like, if I rip it back, I'll probably just be happy. And if you have a big pile of yarn to work through to get back up to where you were, that can feel a little daunting. But usually after I've made that decision, like it just, for me anymore, and I'll leave a mistake, like a little mistake, like if the knit two together's in the wrong place or whatever. But if it's, a little glaring, I never regret the ripping back part. I always am appreciative that I made it right. So that's just my opinion. You do not have to ever rip back anything you don't want to rip back. And then a couple years ago at Easter, I ran to the gas station in town to pick up a Diet Coke and something else we needed. And I'm standing behind this woman at the register, and she's trying to pay for 2 jars of gravy at the gas station. She forgot to make the gravy. She had a house full of company and just ran to the gas station to see if they had some, or called, I'm not sure. But her credit card would not work. She gets out another, she's looking to see if she has enough cash. And you know what? I just stepped up and I said, you go home. Just get home, right? You have a house full of company, you're stressed. You don't have any gravy. You need gravy. I don't know the whole situation. I did not know her, but I just saw a woman in need. So that is the story that started the buy the gravy. Just help someone out, save some pennies or some nickels in a jar and donate it to someone in need, knit for charity, whatever it could be. It's all encompassing. Buy the gravy just means be helpful, can also just mean be kind. She was so like, I can pay you. And I'm like, it is not a big deal for me to buy 2 little jars of gravy, right? Like I could just purchase them for her. I assume that someday someone will then do something nice for me, which is what happened when I went to Watertown, South Dakota and got the flat tire, right? Lady helped me out. So I'm going to send her a little thank you. But that's where buy the gravy came from. I bought gravy for a lady at the gas station in town because we don't have a grocery store. So it has a tiny little grocery section because there's no big grocery store in my tiny little town that's attached to the Twin Cities. So, but I do have to drive about 6.5 miles either way to get to a grocery store. That's the closest. Then Keep It Colorful is my logo. It is my business. It's all about color for me, right? I love color. And so I started kind of signing off with that. I had a sign made. It's not up right now, but I had a sign made that said, just keep it colorful, because to me, color means happiness. I was shopping last night with my daughter and we were at the new Shields in Eden Prairie, and because Ross needed a coat for Christmas, a running jacket. And so we went in with them and we were going to grab a bite to eat. And she just kept picking out all these really bright things and holding them up for me. And she's not a bright. And she's like, Mom. And every time I would be like, oh, right. It just fills me up. Color just fills me up. There's a striped orange and raspberry jacket with some gold. And it was so cute. And she just knows that it's all about color. And surrounding myself with color does make me happier. And then the last one is Keep Your Fork. And if you have not heard my fork story, I told the entire fork story as a separate podcast. But the story of the fork is when you have people over, for a meal back in, when I was growing up, and everyone would be sitting right after dinner, and the mothers, the women, would be clearing the table, and the girls would clear the table, and the men would sit there. But a lot of people would sit, so this does not have to be a sexist situation here. And someone from the kitchen would yell, "Keep your fork," because that meant that dessert was coming. So the parable, or the story that goes along with that, is that if you hang on, if you are a faith-based person or a human-based person, that if you hang on long enough, things get better. And so if you're going through a tough time, keeping your fork, keeping your faith, keeping your just hope alive is the fork. But when I was pregnant with my only child, who happens to be a fertility baby, and I was going through a really difficult entire pregnancy, but then delivery, and I told that story, my mom went to the cafeteria at the hospital and brought me a fork. And Kylie was not emerging into the world, and the nurse afterwards said to my mother, "Why did you hand your daughter a plastic fork from the cafeteria during that time?" And my mom said, "It's a faith thing. She would know to hang on and to hang in there because she has a faith." So there are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 phrases that I use at the end of every podcast, just tied up in a tight little nutshell for all of you to know what the stories behind those were. You can go back to the individual podcasts and just search on Ravelry in the show notes for each one if you want the whole long extended version, but I think I did a pretty good job of covering that for everyone. And if you are someone who has been with me all 4 years, you probably do not need this. But I think it's pretty hard to watch every podcast from someone in 4 years and not miss one. So I thought this might be helpful for everyone. It does happen to be December of 2022. So happy holidays. And I will see you all in the new year. Bye.